Hi everyone and good afternoon. My name is Lisa Kraft and I'm the training manager here at Fair Warning. Welcome to everyone who has joined the webinar. I know we have still quite a few people who are logging in right now, but we want to be respectful of everyone's time, and so we're going to go ahead and get started here. So I just want to say welcome to everyone. Again, we still can see that attendee number keep going up, so welcome to everyone who's joining. But today we'll be focusing on leveraging monitoring best practices in order to save our customers time. And with me today, I do have two of our Managed Privacy Services analysts with me, so I'll let them go ahead and introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Taylor Arau. I am an analyst with the Managed Privacy Services here at Fair Warning. I help my customers run the Fair Warning application and do all the investigations and alert processing for their accounts.
Hi everyone, I'm Atlas Lake. I'm also a privacy analyst with Managed Privacy Services. I handle a bunch of customers of different sizes across the country, and I basically run their application for them, take care of page complaints, monitor their enforced policies, write up investigations, things like that. And I'm happy to be here.
Great, thank you both. And thank you for your time being here. We really appreciate your expertise and willingness to share that with our customers. So just a few housekeeping items before we go ahead and jump into the demo environment and our slides that we've prepared for the group today. So we do want to let you guys know, as a reminder, we do have the customer community. And with that being said, all of the sessions here today are recorded and hosted within the Fair Warning community. You have the opportunity to join our regional Fair Warning user groups to gain insights from our peers. And then additionally, we want to remind everyone with the new Fair Warning Ready professional online certification course, we do hold that on a monthly basis, and this following month will be September 2018, we'll be focusing on MetaTech. And that will be September 17th through the 21st. Continuing to move forward with our community, we do have the ideas section, so we want to remind you guys about that. It's really just a space where you can go ahead and interact with your peers. You can put ideas as far as product enhancements or different features that you would like to see within the Fair Warning application. So we encourage you guys to jump into the community and share your ideas with your peers. So today we're going to focus on several items. High level, you'll be learning best practice monitoring and of course expertise from our Managed Privacy Services team. So they'll be sharing kind of the why we run certain reports versus others, and best practices around report building and things of that nature. Additionally, they'll touch on how to better understand your data, since it's very specific in the line of work that we're in, depending on the electronic medical records that you all utilize. And then lastly, we'll cover our behavioral analytics menu, which is our best practice menu, and we'll focus on the different reports that are available within Fair Warning that we recommend for the bulk of our customers. With all of that being said, we're going to jump into the content, and I'll kick it off with Taylor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So like Lisa said, today we're going to be talking about the best practices that we employ here at Fair Warning when we're working in the application ourselves. And where we're going to start is by looking at some of the key instances of policies that we focus on here at Fair Warning, rather than some of the more common similar ones that we see our customers using. So to start out, we wanted to focus on a policy that we run, household snooping versus same last name. And the reason that we run this, that we focus on household snooping is for two main reasons. The first is that it increases the accuracy of the alerts that are being created within Fair Warning, and the second is that it decreases the number of false positives that you run into when you're dealing with the alerts. So the way that this policy works is that the household snooping policy, instead of focusing on the names of the users and the patients, looks at where they live. It looks at the address information and the zip code information for the user and the patient involved to try to determine people that live in the same household and therefore are likely to know each other, if not necessarily be legally within the same family. And we prefer this to same last name for a few reasons. The first one is that there are lots of people that share the same last name. If you have an employee in the registration department who has a common last name like Smith, the problems of a same last name report can become very clear when you see that they pop up 5 or 6 times a day every time somebody with the last name Smith comes through. On the other hand, if you're dealing with a household report, you're only going to get those people who are actually living together and actually dealing with each other on a daily basis. So right there, you're getting rid of a ton of false positive alerts because you're only actually getting alerts for people that are likely to know each other. And also, you're eliminating a lot of non-issues of just people who happen to share the same last name. And this is just an initial example of the kind of things we consider our best practices, which are alerts that decrease the number of false positives you're going to deal with, increase the accuracy of your alerts, and save you time.
Yeah, Taylor, and there's some excellent points right there. I've come across quite a few customers that were running same last name, and yes, there is the fact that, well, what if you have a family member that doesn't live at that address? Well, what we look at with this best practice monitoring is we look to see what is going to make the most effective time with your time, as well as what is going to be your higher risk, and also for accuracy. So if there is a potential that someone with the same last name is at a different address, however, we really want to concentrate your time on ones that are actual family or household connections. So by running it by patient address, we're going to have a lot more accuracy, and you can quickly start monitoring for household snooping, which is the objective of what you're doing with same last name.
And those are all great points. Thank you guys so much for sharing that information with household snooping. And then one other item or use case that we can definitely share with the group is keep in mind that this policy, if you're running household snooping, will catch folks who don't necessarily, they're not family members, so maybe they're roommates of some kind. You can catch, girlfriends, boyfriends, spouses, partners, things like that. So it really opens up the doors to catch a little bit more than if it's just same last name, which kind of leads you down a rabbit hole in cases that we've seen over the past, 5, 6 years.
Yeah, it's especially great. I know in my experience from what I've seen, it's very common for people in the medical field to not want to change their own last names after a marriage due to a sense of pride, things like that. Household snooping is going to be able to find those relationships while same last name is not. So the next policy that we've been looking at, Atlas is going to talk a little bit about, and that's the self-modification policy.
Yeah, so I know a lot of customers that like to run their self-access of records and don't focus as much, and that kind of covers also your self-modification. But again, that's something that we've seen is very, very common as far as users accessing their own record. Especially when you don't look at it and it's not actually a HIPAA violation, it's not taken as seriously oftentimes. So what we focus on and what our best practice when it comes to monitoring users going into their own chart is kind of hitting more on that, what the risk is for an organization. You're going to have a much higher risk when you have a user going in and changing things within their chart. I mean, I've seen things with like drug diversion, people reactivating old prescriptions in their chart, or changing a diagnosis so they're not, falling on their transplant list because of a recent admittance to the hospital. There's also been things where the people are going in, and I've seen where they are changing things in their billing record so that they don't get a collections letter, and they basically are stalling the payment. So yes, you're going to see things like you're not going to see them checking their employment. You're going to go for that high risk, the things that make your organization vulnerable. And again, that kind of falls back into our best practice of looking at what's risk and what you need to really focus your time on instead of just like a general blanket.
Perfect. And we did have one question come through, and I appreciate all the customers utilizing the Q&A. I encourage you guys to utilize that Q&A section because we do look into that. But we had one customer ask, is there an analytic report for self-modification? And the answer is yes. And we can definitely go into how to build that report and share some insights there. With self-modification of records, that can be a tricky one for customers just because the modifications need to be pulled for the specific audit source, so we can have the analyst speak to that here in a little bit. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Then that's true. So we can actually, it's audit source depending, and we'll get more into about understanding your data and what you can actually do with it. But for most sources, you can identify when a user is modifying their record, and so we basically collect lists of those modification names, and we're happy to provide those to you, and they're also available in the community that Lisa had mentioned in the beginning. And so kind of going for effectiveness and more high risk, we go for self-access, and we kind of deviate away from that and go actually for the self-modification. But that's kind of like the idea. Taylor, I know you've had some experience with the employee snooping and the coworker snooping, that we're going for effectiveness rather than just a blanket.
Right. So like I was saying a little bit earlier, one of the main reasons that we choose our best practices over other possible reports is because we want to focus on things that, we want to focus on catching the things that are both high risk and also the most efficient use of your limited time. Both self-modification versus self-access and coworker snooping versus employee snooping are examples of that kind of policy. In both of those cases, you're focusing on finding alerts that are higher risk and therefore happening a little bit less often, but because you're able to narrow in on those specific kinds of alerts, you're able to take the limited amount of time that you have and use it in the most effective way that you can. So in the particular case of coworker snooping versus employee snooping, what we're looking at is trying to find people who work within your institution, but don't just work within your institution, but actually likely know each other. We found throughout our testing and our experience that if you're dealing with people who work for you and are also coming to you for care, the most likely people who are accessing their records inappropriately are the people who know them from the institution, and that's most likely to be people that they work with on a day-to-day basis in their own department.
Taylor, if you don't mind for me jumping in right here, that what you said was exactly right. So when we see that most of these snooping incidents are going to be when they have some type of relationship with them, and like you were saying, Taylor, about how, especially if you encourage your employees to go to your facilities for their healthcare needs, when you do employee snooping reports and you pull any access of a user accessing an employee of your organization, that can be a lot of accesses that you're going to have to review that, you know, a lot of times are going to be business related. And so to your point about going for that, who has a relationship, well, coworkers are definitely going to have more of a relationship than, say, someone from a different building or department.
Exactly. The majority of the incidents that I've found in coworker snooping with the customers that I work with have been employees who are checking on a friend that they know just gave birth, or going into the record of somebody that they know because they want to find out information about where they live for one reason or another. You're just not seeing as often a random person in the emergency room checking on a random person in a completely different facility. This is an especially big distinction in the medical field, where so many different departments are often completely separated on different floors, in different buildings, perhaps even in completely different locations across the city or a state. You really want to be focusing on people that actually see each other, not just happen to work under the same company.
Definitely. And I think with all that being said, you know, it'd be nice to kind of go into the conversation of why do we recommend as our best practice for managed privacy services to go with a policy like coworker snooping as your first enforced policy?
So one of the great things about coworker snooping is that it essentially covers your entire organization at one point or another. And that's one of the reasons why we recommend it as an initial policy, because anybody could be found under the coworker snooping inappropriately accessing a record. But it also does a lot of work towards creating that culture of compliance that we talk a lot about at Fair Warning. A lot of people who are accessing with coworker snooping, who access a coworker, are doing it not necessarily to be a bad actor, but when they get called in and re-educated about the way that they're supposed to, or the way that they are or aren't supposed to use the medical records that they have access to, they'll actually start spreading the word about what they can and can't be doing, not just amongst themselves, but amongst their friends in the department, and slowly that'll spread, helping to create that culture of compliance.
Yeah, right. That's something that we see a lot. We at MPS, for our customers, we have over 6,000 confirmed incidents, and this is things that we've seen repeatedly. Almost all of our new MPS customers, we start off with that coworker snooping because it casts a pretty wide net, so that you can kind of get that message across that to your workforce that, hey, you know, our organization is monitoring health records. And also it just goes along with, it helps to start building that trust where, you know, where now your employees will say, hey, I know that they're watching my record. I know that I have trust that if something goes on, they're going to know about it, and to kind of prevent that. Then you start to know that, okay, now I know I can trust my coworkers to not go into my record because it is being monitored and everyone knows that.
Fantastic. Perfect. So we'll keep moving forward. As far as the behavioral analytics menu goes, there's a few questions that we posed here on this slide. So I'll let the instructors kind of go over these points because they're really good questions to kind of ask when you're determining which policies that you should move forward with, which policies are feasible, things of that nature.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So what we're going to do in the next few slides is kind of go over the different areas that we can monitor for with this menu. And then there's just some things you want to keep in mind. So one of the first things we want to look at is if you see enforced policy you're interested in running, is you want to actually make sure that you actually have a written policy. I know, Taylor, that you've had experience where there may have been some edits or something needed to be implemented as far as a written policy saying, hey, you cannot, go into your own record. Sometimes you don't have that in place.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to do all the work of finding somebody who's inappropriately accessing a record, bringing them in, doing the investigation, and then having them fight you on it by pointing to the policies and saying, I don't see a reason why I can't do this, even if it's, common sense. You really want to make sure that you have that in writing somewhere where all of your employees can see it as to what they can and can't be doing. The other thing you want to make sure is if you find a policy that catches your eye at a later point in our webinar today, is making sure that you have the data to support running that kind of report. For instance, if you were interested in running a self-modification report, you need to make sure that the audit sources you're bringing in can give you enough information about the events occurring that you can tell what is and isn't a modification. If you want to run a household report, you need to make sure that you're bringing in the address information of your users and your patients as well. So there are some policies that just need certain data to be brought in order to run, so you want to make sure that that data is available. And if it's not available, you want to reach out to us here at Fair Warning and find out if there's a way to make that data available.
And to that point, Taylor, I think it's a good kind of place just to remind everyone that's listening, be familiar with your resources here at Fair Warning. We are here to serve you and here to help. So your SWIM or your software implementation manager, definitely have a nice relationship there along with your customer success manager because those are the folks that can really get you pointed in the right direction to get the data that you need in order to run the reports that will meet your risk-based monitoring program. And then additionally, if you have managed privacy services, always feel comfortable reaching out to your privacy analyst, also here to serve you. And then of course our production services team, they have their 24-hour line. You can always reach out and interact with them and we can get you where you need to go.
Yeah. And speaking of reaching out, Lisa, to see how you can get the best data to you, you'll see on the next point as far as making sure we have the required field. This is usually not a hard fix. So sometimes for whatever reason you're not bringing in a user's termination date or patient death dates or anything, and those are fields that when brought in you can create additional reports and additional enforced policies. So sometimes I'll have a customer that wants to run something like, I want to know when someone's accessing patients after their termination date, and then I look and I see that, well, they don't have that field being brought in. So then we can reach out and we can go ahead and start a project to get that field brought in. So definitely those are some of the things you want to check, and we'll show you that in the demo environment, how you can go and check to see what data you have or what fields you have available to you. And that's something, once you see that it's not coming through, that you can reach out again to either your privacy analyst if you're with MPS or your customer success manager or any of the Fair Warning team members that you work with. They're more than happy to help out with that.
Certainly, and we can definitely go into the demo environment and show you guys, when you're editing a report, for example, you can see which fields are available to you versus your selected fields in the report builder. So we can go over kind of what that looks like and what that means. All right, so we'll move forward. As far as best practice preparation, I'll have Taylor go ahead and teach on this slide.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lisa. So our best practices at Fair Warning aren't just limited to the way that you build the reports within the application. We also have best practice suggestions for how you implement the policies on the whole across your organization. So one of the things we really suggest and has been incredibly important in my experience as a MPS analyst is taking into consideration the size of your organization before you get started or before you decide on a policy that you want to build. The last thing you want to do is turn on a new policy and then the next day you get 3,000 alerts that you weren't expecting, or the next week you get 0 alerts when you were expecting a lot more. You want to make sure that you're creating policies that are targeted towards an organization of your size that doesn't overwhelm you and lets you get the information that you want. If you are interested in a policy and you turn it on and you're getting significantly more alerts than you're expecting, you can try to find ways to target that policy so that you're limiting it a little bit more to really focus in on those high-risk behaviors. On the other hand, if you want to find, if you're struggling to find examples of a policy that you're interested in but know they exist, you can reach out and try to make sure that first of all, that your report is built correctly, and also that it's actually as prevalent as an issue as you think it is.
Yeah, and Taylor, what you're talking about a lot is basically making sure you have all your ducks in a row before you actually start that enforced policy. Another thing that I see as far as preparing and dealing with the size of your organization, especially the larger ones, is to not go ahead. I mean, we like the motivation, but it's not going ahead and starting 6 enforced policies at one time. That is just going to leave you overwhelmed with work. A lot of our Fair Warning end users, Fair Warning is not the only thing they have to deal with. You have a lot else on your plate. When you're managing, if you have 6 on and you haven't been monitoring it before, you're going to be overwhelmed with the amount of alerts you have to go through, the amount of investigations that result from those alerts. So what we always recommend is just start off with 1, and as you go to the menu, you may see one that you like and say, okay, we'll stick with 1. Wait until the kind of the workforce realizes it's being monitored. You'll start to see that decrease in the amount of investigations you need to investigate, and then after that, then we can roll out a second one. So always wait for that, kind of space them out so that you're not overwhelmed by the amount, and that a lot of that kind of goes with the size of your organization as well.
Certainly. And do we have a best practice that we can speak to for our customer base as far as the rollout plan goes?
Yeah, so like we mentioned before, we usually do a snooping enforced policy in the beginning to kind of get that coverage, kind of get the word out that, hey, we are monitoring our health records. And then after that, typically we do about 12 weeks before we start another one, and that's with consistent monitoring. So that's another thing is with doing just 1 is so you can stay consistent. If you can stay consistent with at least 1, then that's going to go a lot further than just doing random ones for, at different intervals of time where it's kind of inconsistent with the monitoring.
So kind of moving away, it's good to focus on some randomized auditing and things like that, but to be proactively monitoring is kind of where we're going with that. Perfect. And I think some other really important pieces to touch on here, we've touched on organization size and how there's, some policies that might work much better for a large organization. One that comes to mind would be the high access policies. That's a great way to reach a lot of folks across your organization is utilizing any kind of high access policy. So whether it's high print, if you have print information available to you, or high access of specific kinds of reports, maybe high access face sheet if you have Epic, maybe high access of flow sheet activity if you have Cerner, things like that come to mind. And then some other ones that we have listed here just as far as preparation goes. So for high-level support, we're really speaking to just having that C-suite and kind of board-level support if possible. The more buy-in we found that our customers have, the more successful they tend to be. So just making sure that everybody is on board with all the policies and the procedures that you have in place in order to kind of keep the ball moving as far as Fair Warning use goes and active monitoring.
And Lisa, just to jump in with that, Taylor and I were discussing the importance of that high-level support, but also kind of keeping in mind is making sure that you have support through all the ranks. So making sure that the line managers are on board, that your team is on board with this monitoring, so you don't get issues stuck when you maybe send out a questionable access memo to a manager who either doesn't know what's going on about what to do with this memo or is not cooperating with it. If you have everyone on the same page, they can respond to the memo in a in a fast fashion and get that sent back to you. If HR is on board and knows exactly what the workflow is and they're supportive, it's going to make your life way easier.
Totally agree. Definitely have that clear line of communication in order to make sure everyone is on the same page in the organization. Obviously, that doesn't happen overnight. You know, it takes time to spread the word and get that culture of compliance and privacy started, but you have to start somewhere. So definitely an opportunity for improvement across the customer base, or you know, the ones who are super successful. We hear it all the time at the user groups. They always get to share kind of what they're doing right and how it's working. So we encourage you to attend those user groups and again use the customer community discussion boards to share, you know, what is really working in your organization, or on the flip side, you know, where are there room for improvements or opportunities.
Taylor, before we quickly move on, I know when we were discussing this that, Taylor, you were talking about the importance of having kind of a reinforcement or re-education of the policy that you're about to monitor for before you start monitoring.
Right. There are a lot of policies that we suggest here at Fair Warning that a lot of people who violate those policies are doing it because they either aren't aware that it's not something they're not allowed to do, or they're doing it not maliciously, but because they are getting complacent. If you take the time before you start a new policy to send out a reminder, find a way to spread the word, what you can sort of preempt a lot of those inappropriate accesses by just pushing that information out of, hey, you're not supposed to be doing this. And a lot of those people who were doing it not maliciously or just because they didn't know are going to stop before you actually get around to having to punish them. Instead, you're still achieving the goal of decreasing the amount of inappropriate access, increasing the trust you can have in your workforce, but you don't have to take the time and energy to one by one address every single instance. You can get rid of or stop a lot of those instances before they're even going to happen.
Yeah, and you really want to, and what we're kind of all about is you want to find those bad actors that have been reminded of the policy and are still disregarding it and continuing to do it. Those are who you want to really focus on anyway. So what they were saying, that kind of helps with that.
Certainly.
And there are lots of ways to do that. Sending out a company-wide email, having a bulletin or a poster that you put up around your facility, or just asking your managers to bring it up at a departmental meeting before you turn things on. Lots of ways that it can be done.
Yeah, definitely utilize those stand-up meetings, any kind of staff meeting. And another thing that we recommend is honestly, when you do have the time, get out in the field and go face-to-face with some of the folks that you're interacting with that are your employees. Perfect. So we'll keep moving forward. So with this slide, this is the first piece of the behavioral analytics menu. And so this will touch on data compromise, which really kind of focuses on the snooping category. So with that being said, I'll pass it off to Atlas Lake.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And so here are kind of our most popular policies, I can say, that pretty much all of our MTS customers I know run at least probably 3 of these, if not more. So some of them, you're like we had kind of gone over already, is our coworker snooping. That's one we really like to start out with. Household member snooping is another huge one that's popular. And we're going to go into the demo environment and we'll show you how we build those reports and just some things to keep in mind to make that report up to our best practice standards. Another one for our Epic customers, for break the glass and not leaving an override reason, that's another popular one. So essentially what that report is going to show you is anytime someone breaks the glass on a chart and then doesn't leave a reason for why they went into the chart. So that's how we catch people that are either trying to leave as little trace as possible when they're going into a record, to people just simply just putting a number 1 or a period symbol in there to kind of get around it. So that's another one that we use. Temporary VIP or patient of interest is another very popular one. If you have a high-profile patient, a board member, or a patient that's made the news, then we'll put a monitoring on that record and then just kind of keep an eye on the users that are accessing that patient, make sure they are in there for the appropriate reasons.
We also see that utilized a lot if you're in an area where you have, a sports team, things like that. I can think of one that comes to mind where they monitor a specific football team in the area, for example. So just things to consider or think about.
And one of the things you'll notice when you look at the items on this menu is that while a lot of the while data compromise itself is sort of a wide-ranging area to focus on, a lot of these policies are looking at very specific types of access. There's modifications of guarantor information. There's accessing VIPs or patients after they've died. There's self-modification. These are specific types of access that we found over time to be highly correlated to bad acting, or to bad actors who are potentially doing things inappropriately. So we're not just trying to find, or we're not while we're hoping to find all instances of bad access, we're focusing our energy and our time on the activities that are the highest risk.
And so we did have a question come in around VIP. And so that's a great question because it can mean a lot of different things. So with VIP, there's several different ways that we can kind of spin it in fair warning. There's the VIP indicator. So that's essentially, it's in the data feed that is sent to fair warning that the organization selects who meets VIP criteria. And so that's a question that the organization, if they're interested in running something like a VIP report, they'll have to ask themselves, you know, who do we assign VIP to? Do we assign it to anyone and everyone who asks for it and would like to be considered a VIP? Or is it a true VIP status that, you know, it's only a select few people, maybe the board members of the organization, maybe celebrities in the area, things like that, that you assign VIP status to. And then a third piece of that is we also offer something called persons of interest. And so that requires a little bit of light implementation work, but that is where we pull from a public database of VIP, or really I should say publicly known figures across the world. So it pulls from a Wikipedia database, so anybody who has a Wikipedia page you can consider they would be caught on the persons of interest report. So again, just another thing to consider in terms of VIP monitoring, but that's kind of where we'll go with that for now.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of goes into also the preparation, is what Lisa brought up, is understanding, you know, understanding your data. You can see that, you know, you're putting a VIP indicator on a patient is to know why. So sometimes it can be out of hand and just they're throwing the VIP indicator on all sorts of charts. So that's not something you want to square away before you turn on the VIP monitoring.
So next we'll cover data exfiltration. So this is really our second category of monitoring, and I'll pass it off to Taylor.
So the data exfiltration category is trying to find people who are trying to take large amounts of data out of your organization inappropriately, or trying to get access to that data for one reason or another. So what we're looking at generally in this category is people who are doing activities a significantly significantly more often than other people within their same employee title or user group, and are accessing information that is particularly sensitive or would be particularly valuable if it were to get out into the wrong hands. For instance, we have high view and print of demographics. This is a policy that focuses on finding people who are looking at, or more dangerously printing, an unusually high amount of demographics information for various different patients. But if you really want to focus on especially high-risk behaviors, you can focus that in even more by looking specifically at patients who are under 12 or over 65, which are patients that are especially known to be at risk for identity theft.
Yeah, and kind of going off of what Taylor was saying is about how you can trend against peer groups. So instead of just doing it, you know, let me know when someone is accessing demographic information or printing demographic information more than what they usually do, is we can actually do it as a peer group. So collect all the users that are similar and create that peer group, and then base the trend. We'll create an average off of that, and then we can make a report that says, hey, if they deviate from their peer group, let us know and create that alert so we can investigate. And that's what our best practice is, to trend against peers when we're running these types of reports. I always kind of liken these, I like these enforced policies a lot. Kind of consider them almost like a security system. You hope it never goes off, but if it does, you want to know about it and to find those users that are doing something like that. And we see things, you know, with tax fraud and taking that demographic information. Some may be wondering why we do like under 12 or over 65. Those are more about high risk patient population. If an identity of a 12 or an 11-year-old is stolen, it's going to take a lot longer probably for them to find out than if you stole someone that is actively using their identity.
So I do want to focus really quickly on one thing that Atlas mentioned a few times, which is that the majority of these policies are what we call trending policies. They look at the user's activity and compare them to either themselves or the group of users that are similar to them. But policies like these do have some special requirements, and they often are something that you need to work with people at work with Fair Warning to make sure that you can implement properly. So these are the kinds, if you're interested in these kinds of policies, make sure to reach out to the team that you work with at Fair Warning so that we can make sure that everything is set up properly.
Correct. And what Taylor's referring to, just to be transparent with the group, is we look and make sure that there's things like indexing in place. And so you can kind of think about like an index in a book. And so we want these reports to run as fast as possible for everyone. And so we look at things like making sure that the right fields are indexed so that it knows to look for the correct event name, for example, if you're looking at demographic information, or maybe the correct event type if you're looking for printing information. And really what that means is by doing the due diligence with our team, we make sure that the reports run and turn correctly and fast for our customers in order to save you guys time. And then before we move forward, just one thing I want to make sure is reiterated is when we say peer group, just want to make sure that everyone understands that peer group is really defined by users who have the same title and department, because we want to compare, you know, if we have a patient service representative in cardiology, they're going to have much different duties, right, than a physician or a physician's assistant in cardiology. And so we really want to compare those peer groups and say, you know, for all the PSRs or the patient service representatives in cardiology, we want to see which one of those PSRs is maybe acting way out of the norm, and then the flip side of that is actually identifying those folks who maybe aren't performing their job duties. Maybe they're not performing to, you know, your standards and things like that. So just another way of looking at these kind of data exfiltration cases. So the third and fourth categories, this is actually the ending pieces of our behavioral analytics menu, consists of cybersecurity threats as well as any other information security threats. So we'll briefly cover this, and then we're actually going to jump into the demo environment and get you guys some experience in there with report building.
So with cybersecurity threats, you're really looking at trying to find instances of people who aren't actually within your system trying to access it without or inappropriately. So one of the big ones and most common policies that we see in this category is the after-hours access. This is when you have specific departments or clinics that are only open and therefore should only be accessing records at specific times. You can build a policy to identify anybody who is accessing records outside of those times and therefore could potentially be doing so inappropriately.
Yeah, and some of that goes into people misusing their credentials. So one of those would be after-hours access, like Taylor was saying, but also just access after termination, or being on leave. If you have an employee that's on leave or has been terminated, and there's been some issue with their outboarding process, especially with terminations, we see that there's been the form was sent in to turn off their credentials on a certain day, and IT, for whatever reason, either didn't receive it or didn't have it set to go off at that time, and then we end up seeing in an alert that, hey, this user is continuing to access patients well after their termination date. And that's because there was a hiccup in their outboarding process. So that's another great one. That's a very common one as well that we monitor for.
And just to kind of wrap up this section, as far as the policies that we just mentioned, one field that we find very, very helpful for our customers is patient status. And so that's how we're able to monitor things like, you know, access after termination or monitoring on leave patients. That's an area where we could see, for example, with user status is if they're on FMLA or extended leave of any kind, that's where that information could possibly come through. Perfect. So we'll go ahead. We're going to jump into the demo environment. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, and we'll jump right into it. So we just logged into our training environment. We're going to go ahead and log right into the reports center. And I'll have Atlas run through the various reports that he's gone ahead and prepared for the group.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. So Taylor and I kind of wanted to show you some of, again, starting off with some of the more more common enforced policies. It just show you some of the things that we do that are a little different or you may not have expected to kind of make sure that your report is up to best practice. So we'll start off with coworker snooping, just to make it quick and easy. So when you send your files to Fair Warning, we actually go ahead and we create indicators to find those coworker accesses. And so here, just to show you what it looks like, is when there is a user accessing a coworker, that line of access is given an indicator of 1. So as we're creating our enforced policies, we're going to want to make sure that we are only pulling accesses up between coworkers. So that's why we have coworker equals 1. All right. And then, so I want to point that out. And then we're going to get into household. Household, there's a little bit, some more interesting details in there that we want to definitely show you to make sure that your household snooping report is up to best practice.
So household snooping is one of the, well, if you're looking at it, it can look like one of the more complicated reports that we suggest strongly here at Fair Warning. It has a lot of fields, it has 2 separate logic groups, but really what we're doing is just trying to make sure that we're accounting for potential for the potential differences that people take into account when they're putting in their address information, whether it comes down to how they abbreviate street or write out the word, or whether they include the apartment information on the first line or put it on the second. The way that our system looks at those, we have to compare the different fields between user and address, or user and patient, in both directions, just to make sure we're catching as many instances of household members looking at each other as possible. And because of that, we end up with a system that, with a report that looks a little confusing, but if you're taking it piece by piece, it's actually really clear. The first thing we start with is a best practice that we have for all of our reports, which is that we look at a time frame of the past week. There's a few reasons we do this. The first is that if there was any issues with data delivery for 1 or 2 days, it allows you to have the report automatically run that next day where the data came in and automatically look over those missing days without you having to rewrite the policy just for that day.
Yep, and then again, the next thing we're going to look at is, like Taylor mentioned, I'll just reiterate it briefly, is because I have had cases with customers where there was one registration department that was always abbreviating street, avenue, road, and then when HR was putting in the user's information, they would spell out the entire address. So say it was 123 Main Street, the user address in their HR file would say 123 Main Street, S-T-R-E-E-T. And then when the patient was getting registered, the registration would put it as 123 Main Street, and they would just do ST period. So where you might initially think, well, I want user address to equal patient address, by doing starts with, we can catch when there's those inconsistencies. And then next is the user postal code equals patient postal code. That's just going to eliminate any type of false positive where, let's say there is, if it's a large area or there are border states and they have same street names, then we can, by making sure it's in the same zip code, we kind of eliminate those kind of false positives.
And then the final part of this policy is the user birth date not equals patient birth date. And then in the second half, patient birth date not equals user birth date. And the main reason we have this is just to make sure we're not catching those instances of people accessing themselves, just because that's not what this policy is for. You know, it's fairly unlikely that people, even household members, are going to have the exact same birth date. So this really eliminates those last numbers of false positives of people who aren't actually accessing household members.
Right, and one other thing that I would add in this piece is really just that differentiation between a filter and a filter group. And so right here at the top, you'll notice this is kind of our first category, right? We have all the user information, and then our different comparators, and then the patient information. And then this is where we go ahead and we want to plug in a filter group to say this is our next category. So on the flip side, we have all our patient information, our comparators, and the user information, and that's what makes this report kind of work both ways in order to capture those true household scenarios. So if we go ahead and we click on number 3 for pick your fields, keep in mind this is a wizard approach, so we can go ahead and click through the different sections if you want to hit the previous or next buttons, or you can go ahead and select these buttons here at the top. There's a lot of functionality here. But this is where we had a question earlier that really spoke to how we can identify the different fields that are available to us versus what we select in the report. And so we have had several sessions on report building, so I encourage everyone listening in to go ahead to the community, and you can search for reports and report building, and those different webinars will certainly be available to you if you want a more in-depth dive into report building. But for this specific scenario, we are looking at a detailed report. And so if I just scroll through here, you'll notice that I come across a line item that has a green X. And if I hover over that green X, it says not in any source selected. So just keep in mind, depending on your audit source, especially if you have multiple sources integrated with fair warning at this time, that there'll be certain fields only available in a particular source.
And then another symbol that you'll occasionally see in this page is if you have multiple different sources selected, you'll see a little green circle where the green X would be. And if you hover over that, that'll tell you which sources that field is or is not available in. And so, and there's some examples. So if you hover over that, you'll see that in this case, the user title field is only available in EPIC 2015, and Meditech. So if you were building a policy that was focused around the user title field, you would only be able to do it for those three audit sources.
Great, and we do want to remind everyone that we do have best practices around field order as well, just another topic to kind of throw in here and just to kind of get you guys thinking in that respect. So keep in mind that our best practice field order is always going to consist of that event timestamp first, because we want to know, of course, when did this happen in the audit logs or in the EMR. And then secondly, we want to see the user information. So who performed the action, followed by the event details. So that's going to consist of, event name, type, description, things of that nature. So what did the user do? Followed by, it'll be patient information. And then after patient information will fall all of the other different items that we have available to us depending on the source. So again, to reiterate, that was event timestamp. So when did it happen? Followed by the user information, who's performing the actions, what actions are they performing, and for who, for which patient, followed by any other details. And just to kind of quickly show you guys, there are these buttons available to make it nice and easy for you to save time so you don't have to, drag and drop so much. So if I just hit remove all, simply by selecting that bottom button, I can add all. Just want to make sure that you guys are aware of all these different items. And then, of course, we have the search feature if you want to quickly identify a specific available field. Keep in mind you can double click. You can also drag and drop. There's several different ways to do it. You can add. So just want you guys to be aware of all the different buttons that are available to get you where you need to go the fastest.
And Lisa, just to go over about what you were saying about our best practice of how the fields are laid out, and that's just so you can quickly look through the information in an efficient manner. So instead of having, let's say, user and then patient information, I can get the user information. Let's say I see a pharmacist from the ER, then I know exactly, and once you get used to looking at the data, I know exactly what kind of data I know a pharmacist does, and I know what event names to look for. So it makes me faster in identifying suspicious behavior. If I see a pharmacist doing non-pharmacy related activity, then without even starting at the patient, I already know that there's already some potential for suspicious behavior, and then I can take a look at what type of patient they are accessing.
Exactly right. And then we did have a good question come in as far as with the field order, referring to the field order, can you make that a button click to order it in the best practice? And so I will say that when you run a quick report, it does default to best practice, so those fields automatically do come back. So just something to keep in mind. And then if I go back to new report, I'm going to click on details. That just means that we're going to have, multiple fields available to us in the selected fields rather than a summarization report where we only want a select few. And if I go through the different wizard approach, you'll notice that it does default as well to those best practice fields that I was just referring to. So there's things in here that, of course, it'll look a little different depending on your data, but I encourage you to go ahead and kind of play around with this section and make sure that it's in the order that you would like.
And like Lisa said, in the community, we have a bunch of report building helpful, worksheets as well as webinars that have been recorded in the past that in training sessions that can show you how to even more in depth build several different reports. So definitely, I would definitely use that resource. It's a great resource.
Great. And then as far as, so one kind of trick that we would like to share is if you have a field order that you're really comfortable with, because I know, you're reviewing a lot of alerts on a daily basis, and you get comfortable seeing the different fields in a specific order, I encourage you, if you're working on a new report, you can go ahead and save it. So for this one, I'm just going to go ahead and save it as our sample. But keep in mind, you can always make a copy, and so it'll make a perfect duplicate of your report, and that way you don't have to spend time redoing your best practice fields. So do keep that in mind. Now I'm looking at our duplicate, and if I go to fields, it'll still be in that same order that I'm accustomed to. So again, just another way in order for our customers to save time. All right, so we are monitoring the Q&A. We have a couple minutes left, and we just wanted to see if there were any more questions or any other items that we can answer for the group before we move on to just showing you a little bit about the community. I know we have a lot of folks who are enabled in there and have some questions about where to find various things, so we can definitely touch on that. So I've just navigated on to the Fair Warning customer community, and again, we're still monitoring that Q&A. If you do have any questions, we encourage you to go ahead and ask anything. We're happy to answer your questions. But right now, I am in the customer community, and so it'll default to your home page, and there's several items here. One that we touched on today is the discussions. And so if I go ahead and I click on discussions, it'll bring me to the discussion board. And that's a space where our customers are more than welcome to post any kind of question related to fair warning that they may have. And it's monitored by our platform specialist, Barbara Baumez, as well as myself, Lisa Kraft. And we're more than happy to share any knowledge, content related to fair warning with you in this space. So again, if you just click on discussions, you'll be able to get to that page. Ideas is another category that we touched on today. And so you'll notice that there's a lot of different ideas here as far as product enhancements go. You can vote on various ideas. So you can see I voted on a few of these. If I scroll down, you can see I have the option to bump it up or bump it down. So this is a great resource as well for our customers to let the product team know, what do we need to focus on? What do our customers need or want within the application? And then lastly, I'll touch on the user group section. It looks like we had another question come on in. So will this presentation be available for replay? Yes, it will be. And I encourage you all to go ahead and join the public group called Best Practice Training. So if I navigate again to the customer community, simply click on the user groups tab and scroll down to Best Practice Training. This is where all of the replays are posted, all of the upcoming webinars. So we always make sure to keep this really updated anytime a new replay is available or we have a new opportunity for you all to have a training. And then secondly, I want to remind everyone there is a search bar here at the top. And so if I just go ahead and I'm just going to search for best practice, that will bring up the best practice training menu. And that's another really great resource for our customers. And if I just scroll down, you'll notice there's lots of hyperlinks available here. And this will navigate you to the replay. And so, for example, if I go ahead and click on Conduct Investigations at the click of a button with Quick Reports, which was our July Best Practice webinar, it'll bring me directly to a knowledge article. It'll explain the purpose of the presentation as well as provide a video replay for you. So hopefully that's an easy way for everyone to understand where you can find this helpful information. Again, I just navigated to user groups, best practice training, and you can go ahead and join that group. You'll see join located right up here in the top right-hand corner. For me, I'm already part of the group, so I just don't have join readily available to show. Or you can search for best practice training menu. Do we have any other questions from the group? Perfect. All right, so that concludes our best practice webinar for today. We hope you guys enjoyed the content. We certainly enjoyed putting it together for you. And if you have any questions, any concerns, anything that we can assist with, please let your CSM, your privacy analyst know. your swim, our production services team, we are more than happy to assist you with your needs and get you going on your proactive monitoring journey.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, everyone.